For most people out there that play games, gaming sessions tend to be a time where you can escape from the daily stresses of life, offering a means of escape in a fantasy realm where all stresses and worries melt away. However, for a subsection of gamers, these sessions are spent being crushed, bludgeoned, burned, stabbed, shot and maimed, only for them to pick themselves back up and take on the challenge all over again. This subsection of gamers seek difficulty above all else. Games that offer complex, deep, intricate systems that will test their cunning reactions and mastery of in-game mechanics to their very limit. It's a pretty sadistic way to engage with the world of gaming, but I respect it, and one genre that really offers up a wealth of difficult challenges to conquer is the RPG genre. There are loads of frustrating, demanding and complicated RPGs on the market that will even see veteran gamers break a sweat, and if you're looking for your next trial of fire, you've come to the right place. We've got a list of truly taxing RPGs to share with you, and we won't keep you waiting any longer. Here is RPG Informer's list of the most difficult RPGs of all time. In at number 1, we have Dark Souls. Let's address the elephant in the room right away. First up, we have the game that created its own difficult game subgenre, unearthed a band of gamers that told those who couldn't beat this game to get good, and most importantly, offers a rich and challenging RPG fantasy adventure. Dark Souls, upon its initial release, was heralded as the resurgence of hard games, in a period where map markers and pop-up tutorials were a staple of the RPG genre. It didn't offer a difficulty setting, it dropped folks in at the deep end from the very second they encountered the Asylum Demon, and kept this cadence throughout with a slew of fearsome bosses, frustrating environments like Blighttown, and cruel tricks like Mimic Chests. Today, even with a remastered version available, I would say that Dark Souls now retains its difficulty status due to the dated and cumbersome controls in comparison to more modern Souls-likes. However, even today, I would recommend Souls fans who haven't played the original get acquainted with this harsh, unforgiving world. In at number 2 we have Bloodborne. If we're going for obvious choices at the top of this list, then let me include my personal favourite Souls-like of all time, Bloodborne. A game that allows you to stop hiding behind a shield and play on the offensive through a risk and reward health replenishment system, a blunderbuss powering system that works wonderfully, and a gothic and gritty world of Yharnam to explore. Bloodborne stands out from the pack and is still regarded by many, including myself, as the ultimate Souls-like. The game also introduces some of the most iconic Souls bosses of all time, with Rom the Vacacious Spider being a personal favourite of mine. Plus, if you manage to make it through the night and want more Bloodborne content, the Old Hunters DLC is some of the best added content that you'll ever come across. Sadly for all non-PlayStation players, Bloodborne remains tethered to the PS4 and PS5. But if you can get your hands on one, playing Bloodborne more than justifies the purchase, believe me. In at number 3 we have Pathologic 2. If you're looking for a game that is about as mentally taxing as it gets, then you'll probably get a kick out of Pathologic 2. As a long-time champion of this game ever since it was released back in 2012, simply as Pathologic, I often find myself fighting this game's corner, and the best way to sell this game to someone is that it's not a fun game. That makes me sound like a terrible salesman, and perhaps I am, but the cruel, punishing nature of this game is what makes it so special. The objective of this game is to return to your hometown and save the townsfolk from a plague that is set to wipe the town off the map. It sounds relatively simple and clear, but due to an ever-changing economy and world from day to day, you'll be faced with impossible decisions such as feeding and arming yourself, or going without potentially to save a citizen in need. It's quite similar to This War of Mine in that regard, and unless you are pinpoint perfect throughout, things will go wrong and blood will be on your hands. It's a game where suffering is part of the experience, and while it's a hard sell for some gamers, I wouldn't have it any other way. In at number 4 we have Darkest Dungeon, specifically on Stygian difficulty. For those that are familiar with the roguelike meets RPG smash hit Darkest Dungeon, you will know that even on the standard mode, this game is a long, arduous and RNG fueled experience that can be grueling, tense and frustrating. However, nothing can prepare you for the devastatingly brutal experience that is Stygian difficulty. This mode requires the player to get through the main campaign within a maximum of 12 deaths, and within the time limit of 86 weeks. Not to mention the fact that hero costs double, light meters go down, and if you fail, the game will ruthlessly delete your save file, ensuring you can't get a do-over. It's a mode that forces you to unlearn lessons taught on the lower difficulties, plan meticulously to ensure your heroes are as strong as they possibly can be, to pick your quests and battles carefully, and generally play with a lot more caution throughout. Each grueling run will be filled with heart-racing near misses and lofty hurdles to clear, but it's these high stakes that make Stygian difficulty an amazing test for Darkest Dungeon's most elite players. So if you consider yourself in that bracket, give this a try. In at number 5 we have Fire Emblem Awakening, specifically on Lunatic Plus difficulty. Fire Emblem Awakening, like a lot of Western gamers, was my introduction to the series, and it's to this day probably still the most accessible and yet the most challenging game in the franchise. If you are playing the game on easy mode, you'll muddle your way through just fine. Bosses are still tough, weapons still degrade, and heroes still permanently die if killed, but it's manageable. However, for veterans looking to really lean into the sadistic side of Fire Emblem, Lunatic Plus mode will have you ripping your hair out and launching controllers at the nearest wall or screen. In this mode, enemies appear more frequently and call for reinforcements more often, they have better stats and carry better gear, and enemies will also have unique enemy-only abilities that make them a nightmare to take down. Plus, specifically in Lunatic Plus mode, these abilities are doled out to fodder enemies as well, meaning there are no easy battles from start to end. It's a massive step up from the standard hard mode, but if you feel like you're a Fire Emblem pro who can bear the brunt of this task, then I wish you luck. In at number 6 we have The Elder Scrolls Morrowind. I know a few of you old RPG heads out there are going to roll your eyes, but due to the way that Morrowind is built, for the modern day gamer, this timeless open world RPG can actually be a tough nut to crack. For those unaware, Bethesda made Elder Scrolls games before the likes of Skyrim and Oblivion, and Morrowind is still regarded by many as the best there ever was. The game itself isn't all that difficult in truth, but the barriers of entry are pretty tough to break through, and in that lies the difficulty for modern gamers. Right from when the game kicks off, your character build matters a lot, and some poor decisions may make your playthrough an uphill battle from there on in. Then you have the combat system, which in the early game will practically ensure you never land a hit on any high level opponent as your skills will be too low, which will feel really alien to modern fans as well. Then perhaps the toughest nut to crack about Morrowind is the quests within, as players will not be able to rely on quest markers to lead them where they need to go. Instead, they will need to read notes, acquire info through conversations and natural discovery, and may even need to use an actual road sign to get directions. I know, mad right? Basically, to boil it down, the learning curve to get into this game is very steep, but I would urge you to clamber up it anyway, because it's worth the hardship, believe me. In at number 7 we have Pokemon Radical Red. Anyone who is even acutely aware of a certain electric mouse Pokemon will also be aware of the debut games in the Pokemon series, Red, Blue, and Yellow, which came a little bit later. These were the foundations from which Pokemon has grown into a globally recognized gaming empire. However, I would argue that the best way to enjoy the debut story is via the GBA remakes Pokemon Fire Red and Pokemon Leaf Green. And if you're looking for a stern test, the Pokemon ROM hack Radical Red is probably an even bigger step up in quality again. This fan-made, free-to-play Pokemon title offers an incredible amount of quality of life changes to the GBA base game, adding modern Pokemon battle systems, built-in Nuzlocke modes, and most importantly, a vastly more strenuous set of difficulty modes. Radical Red's easy mode offers a pretty sizable but manageable spike in difficulty if you just want to wet the whistle. However, if you want to brave this game's radical difficulty, you'll need to understand Pokemon's IVs and EVs, memorize pretty much every Pokemon's typings, their abilities, their synergies, and their movesets. Oh, and if you opt in to do a Nuzlocke on top of all this, well then, you are braver than I ever will be. If you consider yourself a Pokemon master, I say prove it. Take on Radical Red. In at number 8 we have Lies of P. If I'm being truly honest, I'm basing this on the game's difficulty before the recent patch that made it a lot more manageable, so if you can somehow revert the game back to its 1.0 patch, then you'll get what I'm saying here. That being said though, the game still isn't a walk in the park as it is today. I don't think any of us could have expected a Souls-like featuring Pinocchio as the protagonist that would be quite as gritty, dark and unyielding as Lies of P is, yet despite first impressions, this game offers some of the best designed Souls bosses in recent memory and asks the player to become an absolute master of its parry system if they want to see all the game has to offer. This title is about as close to a Bloodborne remaster as we will likely ever get, as it offers fast-paced, reactive combat where you can stay on the offensive at all times, if you have the skills to pay the bills that is, and even though the game gives you a lot of tools to take down enemies like Spectre summons, Legion arms, P-organ buffs and more, you'll still end up questioning your sanity when pitted against bosses like the eldest of the Rabbit Brotherhood or the King of Puppets. It's a non-FromSoft Souls game that stands head and shoulders above the rest, outdoing serviceable titles like Mortal Shell, Neo, Steel Rising and many more, which makes this 2023 Souls-like one you absolutely need to try out. In at number 9 we have Beyond and Beyond. We dig deep into the vault to unearth this JRPG gem from back in the early days of the PS1 era. This was a period where JRPGs like Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger and Tales of Phantasia were offering a much more accessible experience for players, which is perhaps why Beyond and Beyond has been somewhat forgotten many years later. This game offers a turn-based adventure not unlike those listed, but the key difference here is that progression requires a lot of planning, routing, and understanding of in-game tactics, and many will see this one as needlessly hard. The game mainly garners this reputation due to its LP system, essentially making this title a roguelike of sorts where dying is part of the process, but with each death, you start with an HP penalty, increasing in severity until you run out of LP completely. Essentially, this makes the game a war of attrition where you scrape by through the skin of your teeth on most occasions, not to mention your party is so underpowered for over half the game. It's a shame as the game is otherwise a strong retro JRPG with a great soundtrack, smooth battle systems and a pretty fun story. So if you feel like JRPGs have gone soft in recent years, Beyond and Beyond might be the challenge that you seek. In at number 10 we have Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. We now move on to the 2019 Game of the Year winner Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, a game that divides opinion with Souls fans, mainly because it's a From Software game that offers an experience that essentially requires the player to cast aside all the lessons learned in past Souls games if they want to make it through the early hours of this game. Sekiro explores a feudal Japan fantasy story while putting you in the role of the eponymous Sekiro. Having a voiced protagonist is a first for a From Software game, and the result is a more focused story that throws some of the toughest enemies you've ever wished for at you in bulk. It's a game that focuses on finesse above all else and actually gives you 2 lives for each encounter, which would make you think that this would be a breeze compared to other Souls outings, but this concession actually goes some way to showing just how hard the gameplay actually is. Sekiro demands the players master the art of parrying and counter-attacking to succeed. Biding your time and striking at opportune moments is key, and timing is everything. This means a big sword and a strength build just aren't going to cut it this time round. While the jury is still out whether Sekiro is the hardest Souls game ever, it is the Souls game that absolutely flips the script on fans, and if you have become accustomed to the traditional Souls gameplay of old, Sekiro will prove a tougher challenge than most, I assure you. In at number 11 we have Kenshi. I include Kenshi with a little asterisk alongside because in truth Kenshi is only as hard as you want it to be, with sliders present in the option menu to make the game pretty mellow by all accounts. However, if you leave those alone you'll learn pretty quickly that Kenshi is a game that has no respect for you and wants you to suffer. But the good news is that, through suffering, you become stronger and you become smarter. Kenshi is an open world sandbox CRPG that doesn't offer any overarching goals, story, or any real gameplay loop. Instead, it offers players an ability to forge their own path and purpose in this unforgiving world by building squads and settlements and becoming powerful enough to weather any storm the game sends their way. The difficulty comes from the fact that the game doesn't tutorialize anything and immediately sends said storm your way, which can lead to your squad being killed on routine outings, your character being beaten or losing a limb, or you might even end up being enslaved if you're particularly unlucky. It's a unique experience that never tells you how to play for better or worse. So if you like the process of growing in prowess from a lowly beginner to a master of all you survey, then Kenshi is the ultimate RPG sandbox for you. In at number 12 we have Dead Space 2, specifically Hardcore Mode. This one is easily the least RPG inclusion on this list, but I feel there are just enough action RPG elements here for me to awkwardly wedge this one in here. If you feel otherwise, apologies in advance. Dead Space 2 is the follow-up to the successful original survival horror epic featuring Isaac Clarke, and has you deal with Isaac's psychotic breakdown caused by the marker in the first game. In standard mode this game is a fair test, but nothing to really write home about. However, when you turn the difficulty up to hardcore mode, you'll be in for a truly grueling playthrough. This difficulty mode maintains all the trappings of the game's Zealot difficulty, which essentially makes necromorphs complete bullet sponges, lowers the number of items you'll encounter through each section, and generally gives you next to no room for error. However, hardcore mode adds one more devastating caveat that will allow you to save 3 times across the entire 12-chapter campaign. With an opportunity to save at the beginning of each chapter, this essentially means that you'll need to get through multi-chapter portions of this game without a single mistake, or you'll end up having to play hours of content all over again to get to the point where you messed up. The necromorphs are a concern for sure, but when you add in the pinpoint set pieces like the needle through the eye scene for example, and you'll soon realise that you have so many run-ending moments to navigate. It's a challenge run that I have steered clear of despite my undying love for the series, but if you feel you're up to the challenge, then I salute you. In at number 13 we have The Last of Us Remastered in Grounded mode. We move from a very tenuous action RPG entry to a certified action RPG Hall of Famer. The Last of Us is a game so good that pretty much every form of mainstream media has stopped to take notice, putting narrative-driven video games in the same discussion with prominent movies and TV shows of the era. We always knew they were great, but thanks to The Last of Us, everyone else has caught on. The recent remake of the game is not all that challenging, even in grounded mode, but if you go back and play the OG version of this game, you'll have to endure a vastly superior grounded mode that will ask players to plan their routes through areas with precision, rarely waste a bullet, and become masters of stealth to avoid becoming clicker chow. In this mode, you'll need to scour each room for any item that you can find, preserve bullets for moments where nothing else will do, and it pretty much ensures that 90% of the game needs to be approached with cunning and stealth. Oh, and remember that sewer section? Well, in Grounded, it's going to be your version of living hell. The difficulty can be a little unfair at times, as Joel's melee attacks are often unfairly intercepted, and you can end up in save file softlocks where you realistically don't have enough resources to make it out alive, but all in all, it's a very immersive experience, and one The Last of Us fans need to try at least once. In at number 14 we have Baldur's Gate 3 in Tactician mode. I've come to know by playing Baldur's Gate 3 in co-op with my wife, who is a complete JRPG novice. If you play on lower difficulty, you can pretty much muddle your way through every encounter with some lucky dice rolls and a healthy dose of save scumming. However, when you take on the challenge of Baldur's Gate 3 in Tactician mode, you'll soon see how relentlessly unforgiving this game can be. This mode gives enemies much more health, makes dice rolls much less likely to go your way, and the enemy AI is much smarter in this mode. Oh, and not to mention they get a +2 chance to hit as standard. This essentially means that you'll need to ensure your party is strong and balanced, that you plan carefully for each encounter and manage resources carefully. Oh, and of course you'll need a little bit of luck, as is custom in D&D campaigns. I wouldn't recommend that you play Tactician in your first run of this game, but if you want to go for another lap around when you complete this gargantuan campaign, then Tactician mode is the best way to prove your mastery of Faerun. And in at number 15 we have Elden Ring. Finally, I feel it would be doing a disservice to the subgenre of Souls games if I didn't mention the latest and arguably greatest title on the roster, Elden Ring. This title offers a quintessential Dark Souls experience, but with an open world twist that actually makes the early game much more accessible for newcomers to the genre. However, do not be fooled, the game still wants to beat you to a pulp and will do so without remorse. The game will routinely throw roadblocks at you in the form of legacy dungeons housing some of the hardest bosses Elden Ring has to offer, and while you don't have to beat your head against a wall until you break through like most Soul games, and you can run off and do other stuff and come back later, the key takeaway here is that you will have to come back and face them at some point. Then as the game enters the final stages in Lendel, the game essentially becomes a brutal gauntlet run of endgame bosses, each offering a tougher challenge than the last. So to sum up, Elden Ring may be a great starting point for Souls novices, but if you want bragging rights of saying, I finished a Souls game, then you'll have to really work for it. So there you have it folks, 15 absolutely brutally challenging RPG adventures sure to make you consider your decisions and scream violently at your TV screen. We hope that this list has inspired you to take on a new challenge, and if we left out any nailed on tough RPGs, then make sure that you let us know in the comments. I know you will anyway. As always, thanks for watching RPG Informer. I've been Cal, and I'll see you next time.